gone. I think that's me flying. Boom, boom, boom. How are you keeping, man? How you doing? Can you all hear me grand? How's my sound? Bum, bum, bum. Bum, bum, bum. Bum, bum, bum. Bum, 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 bum. Right. It's just flying there. Rachel is just getting changed there, so she will jump in a moment, but I decided to just get things started up, get people in. Well, what's the story? What's the story, kid? How's Johnny doing? Loud and clear, you can hear me. That's the main thing. I have another YouTube tab set up on the side, and when I said that, I heard myself just blaring into my own ear. How you keeping, Susan? How you doing? Any news tonight? Doing much? Susan, Rachel is just running a little bit late there because her own partner, her husband, is off. I think something to do at work or something, and so she's at the house alone, and so she's just getting ready there. So she's jumping when she's ready. In the meantime, I'll chat away to you guys, talk about a few bits and babes. I'm all right. Nearly broke my hole on the frost. Oh, very bad, is it, Johnny? I'm pretty sure you told me last time we were staying, or it was Jim told me where he's. Your cold is on. Here, I'm over in Okinawa. I don't know what you're talking about. What's this cold feeling? I'm still on t-shirts. It was about 2 years ago. I was working as a what's it called? Online language coach, you could say. And I was with kids, and it was this time about 2 years ago. And the kids jumped onto the internet and they were asking me, "What are you doing on shorts and t-shirts? Are you crazy?" And I was like, no, I'm over in Okinawa. Like the kids thought I was insane being in shorts and shorts and t-shirts in this time of the year. Like, I have the cold as well. Jesus, the worst ever. They may take 3 hours off my route, but they'll never take my overtime. Are they very bad at work, Kevin? I'm in Buffalo, New York. Oh my God, I'd love to go to New York. One of my dreams is to do an Irish medieval talk, or just a talk on medieval history in New York sometime. Go down to one of the public buildings or something and do an old public speech on medieval history. Love to. New York, Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, especially all those regions. Love to. And then pop over to Canada, Toronto, and all that stuff. Australia, one of my lists as well. Love to go on a tour and do medieval talks around those areas. Philip, I remember hearing about how in medieval Irish histories, some were wolf-ish stories, well known. Yeah, there's big, massive, hundreds of wolf stories connected to the Irish war bands. Because the Irish war bands from around February over to November, you'd have all the war bands that would go out. Most of them were cattle raiding war bands. Obviously, you'd have the mercenaries as well would jump in there. And what was I going to bloody say? You'd have the mercenary war bands that would jump in. And what would they blood to do again? Oh yeah, so you had the mercenary companies at the side with the war bands and stuff, which were gallows glass. But then you had the cattle raiders, and they would hardly ever wear armor or anything. And what they would do is they'd be considered like the equivalent of what was it called? Wolves and stuff. Rachel's jumping in there. They're all asking about you. Where's Rachel? Where's Rachel?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening. Yeah, I'm a one-woman show today because my my support staff flew to Seattle, so I have to do it all.
The joys.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about this today because so many of you have seen, like, literally, Philip, that short is up to over 200,000 views on YouTube alone. It's over 100,000 on TikTok. It's over 100,000 on Facebook. It's my most popular freaking short. And all it is me complaining about the inauthenticity of medieval movies, right?
Yeah.
So so I'm really excited to, maybe this could become a series, depending on how much you all enjoy it, to point out the foibles and the flaws in all of these movies. And people keep asking me, what movies would you recommend? And I'm like, I've got a list that's literally right now, my current list is of movies is too long. I only have 2 movies I would recommend that have some sort of authenticity in the way the clothes look. And that is Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet, which is technically not a historical movie. It's a fiction, right? Set in a kind of timeless Renaissance-ish Italy. And Ever After, which is also a fairy tale. It's not supposed to be a historical movie, right? It's a kind of historical resetting of the Cinderella story. It's also, and it has some historical characters, but it isn't an actual historical event. So here we have 2 movies that are not, either of them actually depicting history, that are more accurate in every metric than any history movie I've seen come out of Hollywood ever.
It's crazy, because it's the same thing with Lord of the Rings as well. Somebody turned around and says, if you're looking for an Anglo-Saxon movie that's actually the closest to being historically
Rohan,
accurate,
the writers of Rohan, right? All those people in Rohan look like they're out of the Bayeux Tapestry. It's like,
it's historically accurate. It's crazy, because, and even the riveted mail, it is the Lord of the Rings is the, to my knowledge, except for Outlaw King and Lord of the Rings are the only 2 movies that actually have riveted mail. And there's stories. I don't know about the Outlaw King, but there is stories of the entire staff, not the entire staff, but specialists sitting around for hours on set making riveted mail, because that's what people did on their free time on the Lord of the Rings, would sit down and rivet the mail. So there's stories of like Peter Jackson and stuff walking into the back and talking to them while they're riveting the mail and stuff, and how their fingers are being wrecked up from riveting and stuff.
Oh yeah, it's gruesome work. I mean, you're going to get blisters. You're going to miss the rivet sometimes. So there's that.
Different game. Like,
people ask me about the Outlaw King too, and the clothing is terrible. Just terrible. It's terrible. It's terrible. It is not at all accurate for Henry V's era. The colors are terrible. The silhouettes are terrible. The finishes, buttons, and toggle. It's terrible. No, sorry, not the Outlaw King. Sorry, the King. You're right.
Right. I was thinking. Outlaw King.
Right. No. The Outlaw King is also terrible. All the stills I've seen, the clothing is not accurate at all. It's fantasy medieval. Yeah. Sorry, guys.
I love the Outlaw King. Outlaw King is really, really good. The Scottish
we can totally we can do that one right after Braveheart, since it's basically the same era, and I'm going to have the same things to say.
No, Outlaw King's way better. You need to.
No, it's not actually. It looks better, but it's still completely inaccurate when it comes to the fashions.
Yeah, history-wise, it's much better though. To a certain,
I mean. Yeah. I mean, the history is certainly, it's more based on history, but this is the problem. Braveheart, people approached Braveheart from completely the wrong perspective, honestly. It is not the history. It is a dramatization of Sir Walter Scott's telling of it's not, it's a dramatization of an early Victorian novel. So it is actually not actually history, and it wasn't really, I mean, it was presented in history, but it actually isn't, and it's not trying to be,
Yeah, that's very true as well. You can see that with the opening here. I'll just actually, because we're in the mood now, we might do the start of the movie.
Yeah, the comment is it's not hard to be more accurate than Braveheart. Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with that.
the movie alone, it starts absolutely mental, because you're right, it started in 1280, and it has a kind of already at the very start of it, English invading Scotland and killing
Right.
William Wallace's father at the very start of it, and it paints a very kind of England Scotland interpretation. And it's not until halfway into the movie that it starts. Once it's got down the basics, it starts to complicate things. But the problem is that in what was it 1280? What was it? The King of Scotland was still alive. He doesn't pass away until
Yeah. Yeah.
1284. So the fact that the movie starts in 1280 and it has a England, just a direct full-on England versus Scotland war, which isn't even correct at the very start of the conflict. The conflict
Yeah.
doesn't start completely off like England versus Scotland. It slowly but surely turns into a England versus Scotland,
Yep.
but that doesn't happen until around what was it 1310, around that period. That's where it's when you have, what was it, Robert the Bruce versus Edward the First. That's when it becomes more of a England versus Scotland war. But even on top of that, there's still nobles, especially on the
Yeah.
border area, who still switch between the two sides. So
Yep.
it's a war that's not very black and white, especially at the very, very start, where there's actually not that much fighting between English and Scottish in 1280. It starts off with a bunch of Scottish nobles who are very confused, and that's at 1284, very confused on what to do, and then invite the English king to kind of judge and look after them while they try
Right.
to work out who the correct successor should be.
Yeah, the problem is that a lot of people these days want to apply modern nationalism to
Mm,
past eras, and it just, the people who lived in the lowlands, for instance, didn't consider themselves to be the same kind of Scots as the people who lived in the Highlands, and the people who are on the border. The border was much more porous
mm,
in the 13th century than borders are now, right? And there was a lot
yeah.
more intermarriage, and there were Scots who had territories in England, and there were Englishmen who had territory, fiefdoms in Scotland. So it's not, yeah, right out the gate, we're already presenting a 19th century version of geopolitics,
Yeah.
which is, again, that brings us back to, that's the novel that's actually being depicted. It's
Mm,
not the actual story of William Wallace and Robert the Bruce and Edward the First and co.
mm.
It's a 19th century Victorian novel. So, you know, from that perspective, I guess I don't really have much to say about the clothing. But if we're going to look at it as a depiction of medieval Scots and Englishmen and French and Irishmen, I have some things to say.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, um, so at the very start of the movie, we're given a young, very young boy, William Wallace. But the problem also I have with this as well is the fact that the two, like William Wallace and his whole family, are actually they're not Gaelic, they're not Celtic, but they're
Right.
of an Anglo-Norman background. His
Yeah.
original ancestors arrived from Normandy into England, and then from England made their way up to Scotland, where they were given territories and lands by the King of Scotland. I'm
Yeah,
sure
I
it was
think it was it David? I think it
yeah.
was one of the Davids who encouraged Norman lords to come and take over fiefdoms in his lands, right? Like that
Mm,
was a deliberate move. It wasn't, these Normans weren't invading, they were invited in.
mm.
So, yeah, again, that the narrative of us versus them, is not as clear cut as people would like it to be.
No, not one bit, not whatsoever, to be quite honest with you, because you kind of see the same thing happening in Ireland as well, where we're constantly referring it to as a Norman invasion. And don't get me
Right.
wrong, in 1171, when Henry VII invades into Ireland, he's invading into Ireland. But the
Right.
problem is in 1169, and when somebody does say this, they are kind of sweeping the feet, not just my feet as well, but also the feet of academics, is the fact that what was it? Strongbow never actually invaded. He was a mercenary military force brought in by a Gaelic king. It was a Gaelic king that brought Strongbow in as a mercenary force.
Right.
So to refer to as an invasion is kind of funny, you know. Of course, I wouldn't disagree with that if you turned around and said, "Oh well, 1172, Henry II invades into Ireland." Yeah, that literally he raises a big, massive military force of
Right.
allegedly 4,000 men, and invades into the realm of Henry, what was it, of the realm of Ireland. But here in Scotland and in Ireland with 1169, what you see is this kind of seeping in rather than a penetrating invasion itself.
Right.
Mm,
Right. Yeah. It's I think often, unfortunately, history like is reframed in order to suit modern political purposes and modern propaganda, and to prop up sometimes an understanding of national identity that is not necessarily intended for good purposes. So
mm.
yeah, I think it would definitely behoove people to step back and really look at the sources and what was actually happening at the time rather than to run away with these narratives.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%. And
Yeah.
I very much agree with what Caveman has just said there, that Scotland is very diverse, even language wise.
Yeah.
And you can see that mixture of Old English, while the Highlands, Scots, Gael, and the Old Irish also have Picts, Britons, Norse, Gaels, Saxon,
Yeah.
French. So it's not a case of how this movie paints it as a primitive Celtic people. And you can see it in the clothing. The clothing is very primitive Celtic people, and that's the imagery it starts off with. And
Right.
remember, this is one of my favorite movies of all time. I absolutely love Braveheart, but one of the things that very much annoys me is the fact that it paints an image of a primitive Celtic people against
Yeah.
a civilized, a Roman civilized English enemy. Do you know?
Right. And also, but the corollary to that is that the civilized people are evil, right? That's the
Mm,
presentation. The English are evil, like
yeah.
they're all evil. All of them are evil. And the Scots, the innocent noble savage, right? It's we're
Mm,
back to that bloody noble savage idea, but here it's being applied to the Scots as the Celts, right? They're the noble savage. They are downtrodden. Evil civilization is coming in and trying to enslave them, right? That's it. That was a very 18th century, 19th century idea of the noble savage.
mm,
And basically it's getting applied really heavily here, as though, everyone in Scotland was pure and innocent and never did anything wrong, except when they do. And then, when by going over to the English, it's a complete betrayal and they're complete scum, right?
mm,
So yeah, it's a bit of a tired narrative just to start with. And the idea, like you said, the idea that the Scots are just these Celts, right? Like
mm,
nothing has changed about their genetic or ethnic makeup in 3,000 years, right?
mm.
It's untrue.
Well, the thing is that multiple times, especially at the very start of the start of the movie portrays that this has been a war that has gone on for 100 years. And I'm like, wait,
Right.
the war hasn't even started yet. Officially, the Scottish
Yeah.
War of Independence only starts in 1284. And even
Right.
on top of that, as we just said there, it doesn't start off as a direct war. It's something that bleeds into becoming a major war. And it's not until the turning of the 14th century that we have full on Scottish versus English violence.
Right.
At this point of the movie, it's very, very blurry between both the realm of Scotland and England.
Yeah.
So yeah, but like as you said there, one of the indications that they give away that this is a primitive Celtic people, and a huge problem I have at the very start is the clothing. Rachel, what do you think of the clothing? Do you think it's primitive as well?
Oh my God, it's terrible. It's so, and William Wallace is from the Lowlands, right? He is not
Mm,
a Highlander. So to start with, that part, the lowlands of Scotland were intensely connected to the rest of Europe.
mm,
They were intensely connected by trade routes, and we know that because, for instance, in Glasgow, they have done excavations from the 13th and 14th century, the era of our movie, that have shown large numbers of luxury goods from the continent, not in the castle, not in the homes of noble people, but out where the average middle class merchants and artisans lived. So we know that they were basically wearing the same kinds of garments, the same kinds of jewelry as people were on the continent in Europe. So
mm,
there is no uh, it is absolutely sophisticated. They are wearing sophisticated fashions. They're wearing colors. They're wearing beautiful jewelry. They're wearing luxury goods that have been imported. right? Now, obviously, if you are a serf, you're probably not wearing a luxury silk caul, but you're also not wearing raggedy clothes that are mud colored, right? So there was a large and thriving middle class by the late 13th, early 14th century, and it was rising as that era went on. And so, yeah, no. And in fact, if we want to, you could show some of the actual, pick any of the images I sent you, and you can basically get an idea of the kinds of clothing that people in this part of this time in this place would have been wearing, right? This is what we're looking at. We're not looking at shapeless whatever. We've got tunics that are constructed using geometric construction to create a narrower waist and fuller skirts for the men. They're wearing hosen that are fitted to their legs by cutting them on the bias, probably made of wool, especially in Scotland. Right, their hair is kempt, meaning combed and styled, and sometimes the men would wear a coif over it. Right, so we're not. Yeah, this is not even serfs had colored clothing because there are plenty of weeds growing the hell all over Scotland that can be used to dye fabric pretty cheaply and pretty easily. So we're not. Yeah. So even the lowest of the low had color in this era, and we know because we have chroniclers that talk about various levels of society and how they were dressed. And no mention is ever made of, the serfs in their rags and their dirt colored clothing. So, yeah.
But you can clearly see it, the massive difference between the nice, bright, beautiful clothing that we can see here. Like, this should be exactly how little young William Wallace should be dressed in the opening. And this is pretty much like this is more of what we should have seen, even color-wise, should have seen at the opening of Braveheart. Instead, it shows us a very savage, backwards Scotland, Celtic,
filthy, muddy, so much mud. Scotland is just mud.
Yeah, which is wild because, as we said before, William Wallace is of an Anglo-Norman background, and even his house is. Look at that! His house is falling down. Why is his house falling down?
Yeah, and the crazy part about that is they then talk about his uncle taking him on pilgrimage to Rome. It is not cheap to go on pilgrimage to Rome. If you are from a family that can afford to pilgrimage to Rome, you're not living in a falling down shack. I'm sorry.
Right. Oh, for sure. Like, it should be more something like this. You can see this Anglo-Norman house starting to appear in England and then make its way into places like the southeast of Ireland and also up to Scotland. So even in the areas where William Wallace is at this point, the Wallace family is, which is kind of the blur between the Gaelic world and the Anglo-Norman world, the Norman Scots world, or however you want to label it, you should see a mixture of both roundhouses, the Gaelic roundhouses, and these Anglo-Norman houses start to appear in Wallace's local area. And Wallace himself should be, ignoring the big massive hole that's only there for you to be able to look in. But regardless, this should be more fitting to what Wallace should be living inside of, rather than, why is his house collapsed?
Right. What is wrong? Yeah, I mean, it's I could understand if we're talking, it's just after the Black Death and there's been this massive die-off, and so obviously structures aren't being maintained. But this is before that, right? Where there should be no reason for him to be living in a crumbling home. So it's an intentional ploy to create an emotional response from the viewer, right? This underscores how downtrodden poor William Wallace was, and how he's a rags to power story, right? He goes from being what looks like a poor serf with nothing to being this warrior who leads Scotland to its freedom, except he doesn't. And that isn't what happens. There were a couple of questions. I just stopped that, cancel. There were a couple of questions I wanted to answer. I can't scroll back in the thing. One of them was about dye stuffs, because you very rightfully addressed the topic of dye stuffs. So art can be dangerous. Like, I'm standing in front of actual medieval art, replica actual medieval art, right? And these colors are very bright. this is fabric. And so this actually shows you what kinds of colors are possible on fabric, which is different than what is necessarily possible using pigments on vellum. But we have extant garments from this era. We have dyeing manuals from this era that talk about how these colors were achieved. So we know that for the most part, the colors represented in the art are pretty fairly accurate depictions of the colors you could actually achieve on garments. But yeah, if you wanted a darker color, the darker and more saturated the color is, like this is a very saturated blue that I'm wearing now, for instance. This would probably require several dips in the dye bath. So the darker your color is, actually, the more expensive your clothing is, because you actually need more dye stuffs and it needs more processing to achieve that level of darkness. So putting peasants in dark browns and dark blacks is actually like that snow. Those are expensive colors, in fact, to achieve. So yeah, for more dark colors, you have to dip the fabric multiple times. And in the medieval world, in medieval Europe anyway, nearly always the fabric was woven first, undyed, and then it was dyed after it was woven as part of the finishing stages of the fabric. So you had more flexibility about what colors the fabric would ultimately take. First you weave it and process it, and then you dye it, and then there's more processing, usually for wool, especially after the dyeing process, to make it all nice and shiny. But yeah, good question.
Great question for sure, especially when we're covering this kind of clothing and stuff in the medieval period, and something we'll probably just continue to bitch about for the whole movie. It's true, like
Yeah, it is.
going between that and the political motivations at the very start of the movie. Sorry about that. Because as we were just saying there, like pure Alexander the Third has only recently passed away. So at the very start of the movie, we're kind of hit with this sudden thing of poor young William Wallace chucked into a world where his abusive, it must be an abusive father, I have no clue what's going on here, has decided to put him into rags, dump him into the shed, and then has gone off to fight the English in reasons that we don't know, because King Alexander the Third is still King of Scotland at this point. He hasn't passed away, and he won't be passing away until around 1284, where he decides he goes out for a horse accident when he's going up to pick up his Norwegian wife. And so that's where he passes away. So he does not pass away until 1284. So why William Wallace's father decided it would be an absolutely wonderful idea to go down to the border and fight the English and get himself killed is above my understanding. And also on top of that as well, he seems to be an absolutely insane father, just completely insane. You know, if you were to look at the historical facts, crazy.
Yeah, it's. I mean, maybe he was going for a raid, which the purpose of which would be to come back with, stolen, looted goods. But yeah, there's no border war at that point. Yeah. It's just not a thing.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe he was raiding another clan or something, but it says the English, so no matter, and don't get me wrong, I'm playing a little bit silly here. I know ultimately it's meant to be a case of, and Wallace said that a few times in the movie. He turns around and says multiple times, we've been fighting the English for 100 years. And it's like, wait, no. Scotland has just finished a war against Norway. Scotland has been fighting Norway for all those years and is only starting to wrap that movie up with Alexander III marrying a princess from Norway, making her Queen of Scotland until there's an accident on his horse, which kills him and then disqualifies obviously his line has died out. And that's what causes the fighting between two major Scottish families, multiple major families, which leads to two major families, one of which ends up becoming the Bruce, but we'll talk about him later on and stuff. I thought you were going to say something there.
Yeah, no, so there's a good comment here, actually. Was William Wallace a freedom fighter fighting against evil England, or was Braveheart, William Wallace, the evil one, and England, the victims, right? So I think the truth there is that it's in between, right? It's with freedom. A freedom fighter is also generally a term that is a concept that is much more modern, right? It's more of a concept that really rises up in the 18th and 19th centuries in European history. before that, it's more a question of just who's going to control the, who's going to control the resources. That's what it's about. And often if one king took over another kingdom, they didn't necessarily, with William of Normandy is a kind of an exception. They didn't usually just bring in all their own aristocrats to set up shop and take over the ruling of the fiefdoms. William of Normandy is the exception, though, because he wasn't a king. He was a duke, and he had these barons who helped him win that crown, and he needed to pay them vis-a-vis fiefdoms. So that was kind of an exception to that. But I don't know. I've never, once you understand more about the socioeconomic and political situation between 14th century Scotland and England, it feels less like freedom fighting and more just the usual medieval warfare over power.
Yeah, because that's another very interesting thing as well, is that at the time, like here we are putting an exact date of, 1284, that's the start of the Scottish War of Independence. But at the time, most of these Scottish nobles had no clue what the hell was going on. Their king had just died, and they were trying to put their realm back together when they invited Edward I up to rule them. And this is, they didn't realize Edward I was a bit of a psycho, and he was looking to take advantage of the situation. They had no idea if that's what his true motives were, which is interesting in itself, because as we try to get, the pieces of the start of the movie together, where it introduces a young Wallace and the world around him, that he's been fighting the English for 100 years, and the Scottish War of Independence started in 1280, not 1284. It is at that point then it shows Isabel of France.
Yeah. So Isabel of France, she's born in 1295. I would like to point out. So
not 1280? No way.
Yeah, 1295, my friends. So she is she is not a young woman. She's basically a child when she comes to England. So there's that. And she is, she is the daughter of Philip II, Philippe Auguste of France. So she is, she's a French princess, right? Which is a big deal. But yeah, she's depicted. She's definitely not as mature as Sophie Marceau is in this movie. So the thought of, when does William Wallace die? When is he executed? I forget. What is his date of execution?
Oh, that's gone. That date. Did I ever look up the date? I'm going to do it very quickly now.
My feeling is that there's not a shot in hell that probably tween Princess Isabel of France is going to be having any kind of affair with William Wallace, let alone one that results in a bastard child.
Yeah. William Wallace passes away in 1305.
Then they're definitely not having an affair.
Yeah. Isabel, She-Wolf of France.
Oh my God.
What do you think of our clothing? Our clothing is very nice, isn't it? Clearly, that must be the most historical clothing that's in the movie, right?
Oh, well, it is. Okay. I mean, that's a low bar. It is, but it absolutely does. So it's been as always completely changed to make it more appealing to a modern audience. If you show what Isabel actually looked like, you can see in the picture. I actually sent you a picture of her with her royal. That is one of them. Yeah. So that is one of them. There's another one of when she's younger and still a princess of France. With her, she's with her father. She's with that one. So she is the young lady who is second from the. She is second from the left. So that's the king in the center. That's her father, and the one just to the left of him. That's Isabel. And she's actually depicted in, you can tell that's Isabel because by that point she'd already married into the English royal family. She is wearing the lions, the leopards of the Plantagenets, right? So that is how she would have looked. And I guess you can't make it show the part we want to see. Maybe show the whole thing. Maybe.
Yeah, we can do that. Whoop,
maybe show the whole thing.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, there she is. There she is. Yeah. So there people can see her. She's the young lady who is second left from center as we're looking at it. And that she's wearing a very fashionable sleeved cloak that was coming into fashion at the second half of the 13th century. In the 13th century, you can see she's got a full wimple and veil, and her hair is, on basically bunned up on the side of her head. So you'll notice she's not wearing something sexy and fitted. So if we go, of course, she's wearing a cloak. So who knows what she's wearing underneath? Well, go ahead and move to that other picture of her kneeling. That is from her her breviary. Yeah. So this is taken from her breviary, one that she commissioned. So this is a contemporary depiction of her by someone who saw her. So this is how she actually dressed. Notice that dress is not low cut. It is not fitted. It's not sexy by modern standards. And she's wearing a cloak because it's cold. And also because, that's just kind of a sign of royalty, is when you're depicted, or nobility, when you're depicted wearing a cloak in this era. So yeah, unfortunately, that whole fitted dress thing is it's not in. This is one of those interim phases in European fashion where women are wearing voluminous garments rather than fitted garments. And it's the usual reaction, counter-reaction. When Eleanor of Aquitaine was a young and sexy queen, the fashions for women all across Europe were very fitted, like so tight that they were actually laced on the sides to be tightly laced. And then as the 13th century dawns, the garments get looser and looser until by the end of the 13th century, they're fairly roomy. Yeah. And it's a form of conspicuous consumption. It shows, look, I can wear lots of fabric, and therefore I am wealthy. So yeah, fitted and sexy, sadly not. Yeah.
What about this photo? This photo gets depicted much later on.
Yes.
Is that of the era century? Because it looks like something of the 50s.
It is. Yeah, it's 100% 15th century. So this, I think, is from the Chronique d'Angleterre, maybe. I think this is one of Jean Froissart's works, right? So it's composed and illuminated in the 15th century. So this, once again, this shows that even medieval people didn't understand their own fashion history. Okay. So this is a 15th century artist depicting what they thought of as a princess. Because this is what princesses looked like in their era. They had no concept about how people dressed before them. There were no fashion historians in the 15th century. So basically, anytime you see a historical figure depicted or illuminated in a work, they will be dressed in the way people from that era, the date of composition, are dressed, not from their own era. So you can't use it as a way to document clothing. Yeah. So no, this is what Isabella would have looked like if she had lived in about the 1450s or 1460s. But she didn't.
You see, no, she's not anymore. I know she's, has her connections with evil things, but I don't think she successfully sold her soul for immortality and lived all the way to the 15th century.
No.
I also seen this one as well. Looking into Isabel de
Ditto.
Sorry.
Ditto for that.
Is this one correct?
Yeah. So that's no. It's the exact same thing as the previous depiction. Yeah, it's depicting. Let me see. I'm trying to think that. I'm trying to remember which marriage that is depicting.
When I typed it into Google, so this was last night, I typed in her marriage. So we had the marriage at this point of the movie when we're reviewing. It goes from, William Wallace doing his little introduction as a young Wallace, and then it goes into the marriage between Edward II and Isabel of France. And when I typed this into Google, this was the image that I had gotten. And I was like, it looks something like out of the 15th century. But I think I can still have an interesting conversation with Rachel about why it's depicted like this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it is. It's from the same work. I'm pretty certain that's also from Froissart's work. So, that is a 15th century depiction of a wedding and a 15th century depiction of how kings and queens, princes and princesses, and nobility dressed for said wedding. So it is not an accurate representation of wedding practices from the end of the 13th century, and it's not an accurate depiction of clothing from the 13th slash 14th century. It's a great
Mm.
depiction of 15th century fashions, though. But even there, and I'm pretty certain, um, so there's some details in there that are slightly fantastical, but the artist chose them on purpose to indicate to the viewer like that is their version of fashion history, changing the headdresses to make them a little fantastical and a little more interesting than headdresses actually were in the 15th century. So a lot of people's favorite crazy headdresses from 15th century art weren't real ever in any
Mm.
period. They were the artist's way of conveying to the viewer that these people are not contemporaries, they're past figures.
Mm.
So yeah, fashion, you could even say that I'd be happy to fully admit that 15th century artists were about as accurate at depicting historical fashions pre their lives as modern movie directors are.
Yeah,
So
but it's so interesting, and you can see it in the comment section as well, who are going, "Hey, wait, is there medieval historians in the medieval period?" And it's fascinating that now we're looking at the 15th century, that people in the 15th century are looking at the 12th century, which is about 200, 300 years after them, and they're looking at it, having their own interpretation and look at what happened 200 years before them.
yep,
That's fascinating and so
yep,
interesting. And it's something we don't think about ourselves, is the fact that, hey, wait, are people in that era looking back 200 years ago and thinking to themselves, oh, what did people do back then? What did people eat back then? How did people dress back then? That's fascinating, and
yeah.
we have a depiction of how they viewed something that happened 200, 300 years before them. The reason why they put them into the clothing of the 15th century is, I do wonder, is that out of ignorance, or
Yes.
is it because of the fashion of, oh, it's just out of
It's out
ignorance, you
of it.
think?
I mean, 100%. So first off, we now have access to all of these resources to explore any period of history visually that we would like using original resources, but libraries were not a thing
Mm.
in this era. There were private collections of books that were not publicly accessible. So the people doing these illuminations wouldn't have had access to necessarily had access to, say, breviaries from the early 14th century.
Mm.
So there would have been very little way for them to have confirmed their ideas about how people dressed or uh, how they dressed in the past. and
Yeah.
and but it was partially about access to that. Now, yes, you would say, well, there were churches with different kinds of sculpture in them, sure, but why would an illuminator care to depict things accurately? There wasn't an interest in depicting the past accurately visually. It
Mm.
was That wasn't the goal. It didn't matter. That didn't matter. I mean, historians writing in the Middle Ages about history weren't necessarily interested in depicting, in portraying, in describing the past accurately either. Right?
Mm.
Chronicles were composed generally with a bias, and that bias was generally, we need to please the person who is sponsoring this work, right?
Mm.
So, that's it. Just there wasn't it didn't matter. Trying to depict people accurately didn't matter. What mattered more was your audience relating to what they were seeing, which is, again, that's what modern movies are doing now. They're more
Yeah.
interested in allowing the audience to relate to what it is they're seeing rather than
Mm.
making it an accurate depiction.
Oh, big time. And I think this was the one that you sent over to me as well. I decided to keep this one in here, although I want to elaborate more on Richard, what was it, Edward the First and Edward the Second's outfit next week, because what happened in the comment section is last night I was putting this together. And on top of that, as well, when I was going through the stuff, because there was so much, not just misinformation, but so many topics in there that I really wanted to discuss, with the opening of the William Wallace movie all the way up to the Battle of Stirling Bridge, that I actually ran out of space. Although there's 40 spaces in this, I actually ran out of space to put more and more photos and information into the presentation today. So what I'll do is next week I'll go into further details about Edward I and Edward II and what they're wearing. But for the wedding itself, they would have been depicted more like this, both Edward I and Edward II.
So weddings, yeah, exactly. So weddings, there first off, the thing people need to understand is that there were no wedding clothes as such.
Mm,
Not like we understand it. There was not a, well, this is the style of clothing you wear for weddings and only for weddings.
mm,
For any given wedding, you had people who had means would have very fine suits of clothing made in whatever was the current and latest fashion. It would be made of the most expensive materials you could afford. It would be made embroidered and decorated with the most expensive, the most expensive you could afford, whatever that was. But
mm.
that was only in the upper classes. At the lower classes, weddings weren't a thing in this era. They just weren't. Marriage was, but weddings, like we understand them, weren't. It wasn't being, which is why that whole wedding scene is such nonsense from Braveheart, right? Like
Mm.
you could absolutely celebrate a wedding, and weddings were celebrated sometimes if it was something that merited celebration, if it was a joyous occasion. But yeah, people didn't have special wedding clothes. They just wore either whatever was the best they had, or they had something expensive made that was fashionable and that could then be
Mm.
worn again and again and again and again after the wedding. Some lessons
Yeah.
we could take maybe from the medieval practices. I don't know.
Mm.
Not to spend thousands of dollars on a dress that you wear once, and
Mm.
rent a tuxedo that you only wear at that wedding. Instead, maybe have a nice suit made that actually looks good on you and that you will wear for other nice occasions.
Oh, I'm assuming as well this is a depiction of Edward the First and then of Edward the Second. I'm assuming that's what's
Yes,
going on here. So
yes,
this
yes.
would be quite good image to use for the wedding of how it should have actually been depicted, rather
Yep.
than two fully grown adults getting married. Who I think one of them isn't even born in 1280. As you were saying earlier.
Right.
So the fact that Isabel is in this movie alone is a bit, maybe it
It's
would have made
yeah,
more sense.
she's a bit of a composite character. I actually found this last night. I had never read this before. She's a composite of two different women. They refer to her as the
Oh.
fantastical French princess, in certain circles.
Mm.
So she's a composite of Isabel of France, which is obvious, and the other person, it was a noblewoman, Marguerite. I don't remember which Marguerite, but yeah, she's a composite of two different noble women.
Mm.
The other woman, apparently, if you combine Isabel with this other noblewoman, then she becomes old enough to do this.
Mm. Yeah, I suppose that makes sense. But from my view, then reviewing the movie and stuff, I was just like, especially the opening marriage and stuff. I understand how it kind of fits together because it goes from one marriage. Now I'll just fly through these images and
Right.
stuff just so you guys have a better idea of how they should have dressed in the opening marriage scene.
Yep.
What's
Yep.
this picture here? I was actually quite interested last night when you sent it on to me.
Right. So this is post 1314. So it's a little bit after the events of the actual events, but it is reflecting back on that time. So that is the King of France accepting homage from the King of England, right? Which
Oh,
was right. That was a thing at this time, right?
yeah.
Remember, this is part of the whole Hundred Years' War we're about to enter into.
Mm,
So the date on this one is actually more like 1340,
mm,
1350. So it is a little bit post the events in question, but I just wanted to show that if you were going to go a little more modern than
mhm,
the fashions, then this is what that would look like, and this is how
mm,
real men dressed. Notice they've got very fitted garments. Or no, this one's not very fitted. They're wearing their robes, right? Well, the gentleman off to the upper right is wearing something fitted. But yeah, so this is Louis the 11th, I think, is accepting homage from either Edward the First or Edward the Second. I don't remember which one, but it is a little bit post period, but not much. It's 1340s. So this is again nothing like anything we see in the movie.
mm, mm, mm. I'm assuming, Kevin, that they would have just gone to the toilet regularly. Like I think it's not until about the 15th century that you start to get clothing where it gets difficult to use the toilet. I think it
Yeah,
was grand for using the
Yeah,
toilet. This there, just lift it up and off you go. Like,
yeah. So in this era, everywhere in Europe, basically, men are wearing brays, which are basically like, imagine linen boxer shorts with a drawstring. Pretty
mm,
baggy, not very tight in this era. They are wearing something that in French is called chausses, or hosen in English. And imagine those as being two long stockings, not connected in any way, that are actually laced into the brays, into the trews, as they're called
mm,
in English, right? And so basically, all you can, what a lot of reenactors do is they just drop they don't undo the hosen to go to the bathroom. They just drop the whole thing, the
yeah,
unit.
that's what I do.
They just drop the unit, right?
Yeah.
And some brays, it's hypothesized that and some brays were actually split for men. Some brays were actually split legged, so you don't even have to do that on those, right?
Mm. The amount of drinking stories I have about people just doing all kinds of mad stuff in the middle of the night is absolutely wild. And yeah, 100%. Even today, I could just imagine that, to be honest with you. People accidentally peeing themselves and everything,
Oh
like,
yeah,
you know.
100%. Yeah, you and I both have crazy reenactor stories,
Yeah.
and some of them not accidental. In one case, this gentleman was very, very inebriated, and he got up in the middle of the night in his pavilion, to relieve himself. But apparently, he wasn't fully awake, and his then
Oh,
girlfriend woke up because she heard water running in their pavilion, and she looked over, and he was in the pavilion urinating on his armor.
oh, lovely.
And she was like, you know what, he's so drunk, he deserves whatever happens to
Yeah.
him. And so the next morning he goes to don his armor, and he's finished, so he starts cursing in the most vehement, foul language you can possibly imagine, without actually
Oh,
understanding what he's saying. Who the bloody ever pissed on my armor? And she said, you did, dear.
yes. Lovely. Yeah. Yeeks.
Yeah.
Right.
Reenactor craziness for the win. But I haven't read any chronicles from the Middle Ages talking about knights peeing on their own armor, just to put that out there.
Trying to think now. I feel like I did come across something about something like that, and I can't remember where. And remember, it was a European story as well, so you've probably heard about it, but it's not coming to mind. So I don't know if it's something my brain came up with or not.
Well, urine was used to clean armor. So
Mm,
urine and
maybe that
sand
was it.
were used to clean
Yeah,
armor, to keep it clean. So yeah,
that was
but
it. That was it. That was
you
it.
didn't. But the knight didn't stand there and pee on it.
Well, yeah,
he,
yeah.
he,
Maybe
he,
that's what
he
came
did
into my head.
he did the genteel thing, which was to pee in a bucket that would
Mm.
then be used to clean the armor.
There we go. Irish medieval history. Someone was asking there, what's my name on my channel? Irish medieval history, easy to find. And on top of that as well, if you want to send me money because I need more money for Christmas, definitely pop over to my Patreon there and have an old nosy.
Yeah, we all need money. We
um,
all love money.
give me the wife last night. What I need now is a man with a suitcase to come to my door and just give me a 2 billion. 2 billion is not hard to ask for, just a suitcase full of hard cash, 2 billion. I'll keep it between me and him, and then we'll just slowly but surely use it over time. Maybe pick up a bag of crisps over time and stuff. Maybe just so I don't get caught with a briefcase full of 2 billion.
Right.
What was I going to jump around and say? Yeah, and I have another one here that depicts Edward the First. I've seen
Yeah.
this before, and I've always been curious. First and foremost, any idea why he's missing his nose? And secondly, do you know the story to that one? Because I don't actually.
So this is his portrait in Westminster. So
Mm,
it's actually sort of one of the earliest portraits of a king as such, sort of in this public place, because in the Middle Ages that fell out of fashion largely in Western and Northern Europe to, put kings on walls in this way. So it's rather rare for the earlier medieval English kings to actually have proper portraits of them. Coins, but who knows how realistic, how realistic can a coin that's this big actually depict the human face in this era, you know?
Mm.
So this is Edward the First. The reason is it's just worn away. It's not, it
Oh,
hasn't been cut off. Yeah, the paint is just worn away. Now, what I don't know if it's because people were touching it for good luck or something like that, but I did look more closely because I thought, wow, did someone purposefully, I don't think someone purposefully vandalized the
yeah.
painting, though. I think
I
if they were going to purposefully vandalize it, they would have done more than just
okay.
rub his nose off.
That makes more sense because I've been looking at that for years, and I was
Yeah.
in Westminster talking to the tour guides up there, and they had no clue either. They were just like as confused as I was to why that was damaged. Yeah, fascinating one nonetheless. But anyway, we'll finish up with the marriage talk, and
Okay.
after this marriage and stuff, we jump ahead a good few years afterwards, up to around what was it 1295, somewhere around there, where we are introduced to a very old, much more older Mel Gibson
Right,
in
right.
a Scottish kilt that's funny and
Oh my
strange
God. Oh
and
my God.
studded leather armor that I've been bitching about for the last 2 weeks now because the same armor, by the way, is also in Banner game. So I've been bitching about this for 2 weeks as well.
Oh my
Now I
God.
know where it came from. Now I know where it came from.
The studded armor, where did the studded armor
Yeah.
come from? Because that always boggles my mind. The studded armor thing is an
Well, we were
interesting.
talking about that. We were talking about that last night, but when it came down to the video game Bannerlord, now I know where they got it from. Now
Oh, right. Yeah.
okay, so for this movie, and this has been my theory since I was, believe it or not, my theory since I was 5 years of age, because I was very, very blessed in being born in Ireland and everything, and being exposed to what Irish armor and stuff looked like at the time. And even when I was a child, you'd see Riveted Mail, and then you see the William Wallace movie, and you'd be like, okay, that doesn't really fit. Where does this come from? So by the time I was a teenager, I understood where. What was it? I'm sorry, my mouth's starting to get dry. I'll grab a drink after I've done my little rant. But anyway, God, it's gone very dry. Very, very dry, very quickly. It's all cotton out again. But what I need to do actually is stop bringing coffee with me. I need to start bringing water with me instead to avoid getting cotton out.
Oh.
I'll have my little rant if I can finish my rant, and then I'll grab myself a drink of water. But regardless, I'm there wondering why I'm starting to get a sore throat every time I finish my speeches after 2 hours. It's because I'm not bringing bloody water with me.
Bad boy.
I know, I'm getting very bad. But regardless, I know what was going on the Irish side of things when it came down to Mel Gibson's Braveheart, and that was the fact that Mel Gibson had just rocked up, and so they were using a lot of clothing from the old Victorian theatre houses, like the Gaiety and stuff.
Oh, got
They
it.
literally grabbed this because when Mel Gibson first rocked up in Ireland with a whole load of alcohol as well, and with the president of Ireland, Mickey D. Higgins, the two of them, he became, by the way, the future president of Ireland. Mickey D. Higgins did, and the two of them were drinking away in Trim Castle, and so they just chucked anything they could in there because at the time Mel Gibson he was using his own money. He hadn't got the grant from Hollywood yet. He does halfway into the movie. Halfway into the movie, he gets that grant in there. But for the first half, they just grabbed whatever they could out of the old theaters and stuff, one of which is this costume. Like, this costume is literally just pulled out of a random theater. And a young Irish girl who literally was probably just in the middle of her university degree in theater studies just chucked this together, wasn't even a qualified historian. Like, this is not the work of a qualified historian. This is a girl working with old Victorian outfits and stuff, whatever they got out of the back of a theater house, and just kind of stitched it together and chucked it onto Mel Gibson. So that's how we got the opening to Braveheart.
Ugh.
Just give us. I'll let you rant there, and I'm going to grab a drink of
Yeah,
water. Just
sure.
give it a
Okay,
moment.
so everyone, I hate to burst everyone's bubble. I know Philip and I have said this before, and I'll say it again. What you all know as the Scottish kilt did not exist in the medieval period. It didn't even exist in the Renaissance. What you all know as the Great Kilt doesn't even make its first appearance until the very, very, very end of the 16th century. And even then, it's just a blanket that is literally worn over top of regular garments. In the case of the end of the 16th century, a doublet and hosen. And it's belted around it as an extra a way of maintaining warmth. So the great kilt being worn in the 13th/14th century doesn't exist. Not a thing. Sorry, everyone. I hate to burst everyone's fantasies of medieval kilts. The Scots were wearing tunics like everyone else. They were wearing tunics in various shapes, but they would have been geometric construction, which meant put together with triangles and rectangles. And in this era, the men's tunics are shaped a little bit, so they actually have full skirts. And I know that's going to upset some very masculine, manly men who don't want to be wearing dresses, but that's how manly men dressed for most of human history. Some kind of dress-like thing that we would call it a dress by modern standards. So yeah, sorry, none of this. Not to mention the fact that he will not come away from this battle alive dressed like this. He will.
Because he really would have been dressed more like this. Now, don't get me wrong, I think some of this depiction might be slightly wrong, but regardless,
Yeah, but
this
still.
would have been slightly more closer to how he would have dressed at the time. Now, last night, Rachel could sense, there was trouble in the force. So it was at this point while I was putting together the presentation that Rachel suddenly sent me a whole load of photos my way. And I was like, thank God, because this was, when I typed in and started looking for William Wallace's armor, this was actually the best I could find. And I still, there's a few bits and bobs in this, which isn't perfect. Now, it gives you a little bit of an idea of how William Wallace was dressing at the time. However, as Rachel had sensed and sent me over these photos here, I'm assuming this is a seal from, I assumed anyway.
No, it's not William Wallace, but it's a knight of this era, right? It's from, I think the seal is actually from England. Part of the problem with Scottish depictions of Scots in the pre-modern world is that during the Reformation, those assholes who were trying to separate themselves from the evils of the Popish Church went and destroyed any and all art that was even vaguely associated with the church, with the medieval church. But that also resulted in a lot of books and manuscripts that had depictions of real people in them getting burnt. Breviaries, Bibles, books of hours, burnt for no reason other than they were associated with the evil Popish Church. So we don't have very many depictions of Scottish people from the Middle Ages. Thankfully, we do have some. There's a few that have somehow survived, and we have archaeology that is increasingly coming to light as more excavations are being conducted in places where textiles have survived. But we also have chronicles. We have chronicles from the era that talk about the Scots dressing the same way that everyone else dresses. Like there's no special anything about the way they dress. And we have expense accounts and that talk about clothes that were ordered and commissioned and paid for. We have wills, we have inventories, right? So we basically know that in this era, the Scots, Highland or Lowland, were not dressing very much differently from the rest of Europe. Obviously, if you're wealthier and you're more connected to port cities, you're going to be more on the bleeding edge of fashion. But to be frank, at the end of the 13th century, early 14th century, fashion isn't changing with that much rapidity yet. We don't start seeing fashion really taking off again in terms of rapid changes decade by decade until Edward III's reign, actually, is when you really start seeing big changes happening all across Europe rapidly. So point is that the depictions we have of people in England in this era are very likely to be exactly the way people in Scotland would have looked.
For sure. Okay, so what I'll do now is that I will cover this photo that Rachel sent me yesterday first, and then I
Yeah,
want to pop over to the, because a lot of people do have questions
yeah.
on William Wallace's outfit. So I want, and there are some very, very good questions as well inside there, and some myths inside there as well that I want to tackle. So I'll let Rachel expand on this photo, and then what I'll do is I'll pop back over to the comment section to do with William Wallace, and I'll kind of expand from there.
Yeah, so this is a depiction of Roger Mortimer being killed and dismembered. And Roger Mortimer is actually more mid 13th century, but this manuscript dates to the end of the 13th, early 14th century. So I included it because it depicts a knight, right? It depicts his accoutrement, it depicts his armor, it depicts his surcoat, right? So you get an idea of what men at arms, noble men at arms of means. And hypothetically, William Wallace is not a poor man. He is actually a man of means historically, despite what the movie seeks to present him as. He was not a poor peasant. He just wasn't.
Mm.
And so here you see how a knight in Scotland or England would have accoutred themselves and dressed in this era. Also, the weapons, you see his sword there, you see his mail, hauberk, his mail coif, his mail chausses, right? There's a different word for them when it's for arming garments. But anyway, yeah. So this is in every way closer to how, William Wallace and the English should be dressing for this particular production.
For sure, definitely 100% agree with that one. Just to cover this myth as well, okay, just going into the questions there about what William Wallace was dressing at the time. Medieval times were really dirty and hard, and you could barely survive in it. This is something we've kind of disagreed with a few times as well, especially going into the Scottish War of Independence. I feel that the medieval world going into the Scottish War of Independence wouldn't have been that dirty. How do you feel about that, Rachel?
Yeah, 100%. It was not.
That...
Guys, humans are humans. The feeling of actual mud clinging to your skin is unpleasant in any era to any human. That's why historically, for literally thousands of years, people who are walking around covered in mud and feces are regarded with suspicion and as being touched by a demon or an angry god, because that wasn't normal. Right? It was not normal for people to just be covered in dirt. It just wasn't. But the reality of medieval Europe in this era, by the end of the 13th, early 14th century, is that the cities and towns have public bathhouses. They all do. They've got public bathhouses. And so even if you can't have a bathtub in your own home, which the rich people did, by the way, but if you're not wealthy enough to have your own private bathtub, no problem. You just go to the public bathhouse. And even if, I mean, Philip, is the only way you can feel clean by submerging your whole body in a bathtub? Is that the only way you feel clean? Yeah.
Well, to be honest with you, I like to jump into a shower, me personally.
Right. Right. So you need a shower. But is that also the only way you can feel clean? Have you really never done sponge bathing at events?
Oh, done it. Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
of course I have.
Right.
I've used baby wipes, the whole shebang. Even at times, as you said there, the old dry towel job of getting a towel and just start taking off the dead skin and stuff. Yeah.
Right. So you can get perfectly clean and feel perfectly clean if you're not brainwashed just by having a basin of water and a cloth. You don't even need soap. And I know people are screaming, yes, you need soap. You've been brainwashed by big body care product industry to think you need all these different kinds of soaps for every different part of your body, but you don't. Right. So I know from personal experience that you can have a basin of water, cold water even, and a rag, and you can scrub yourself clean. It's easier with soap. You don't have to scrub as hard, but you can still do it. So people wanted to be clean, and they had ways of being clean that didn't involve bathing in the sense of immersing your whole body. So no. And we have manuals of health and manuals of etiquette and all sorts of chronicles that talk about keeping clean, about the importance of keeping clean, about how to keep clean from all across medieval Europe. So I just don't buy medieval people. the rich were clean, but everyone else was dirty. No, there's no evidence of that. And someone did quote, maybe you've probably read the account by the Arab traveler,
No.
not Ibn Battuta, the one who's depicted somewhat much fictitiously in the 13th Warrior. I forget which
Oh,
of the
yes,
which,
yes.
yeah. So his chronicle, when he encounters some Vikings, actually some Norse along the Volga, right over in sort of what's now modern day Russia, he
Yeah.
reports that they have some pretty disgusting habits, and that they don't smell particularly good. But that's back in the 9th or 10th century. That's not the 13th or the 14th century, and that's a specific group of people who maybe weren't keeping the cleanest after traveling around for a long time. And also, from what his idea of dirty or unclean
Yeah.
is not necessarily even the modern Western idea of what counts as dirty and unclean.
Yeah. Because they're still washing them that one. It's just they're using the same water, which to him is
Yeah,
considered savagery. But the
exactly.
Anglo-Saxons then also write about it, and they think he's the what was it called? The Scandinavians that immigrate over to, they think they're even cleaner than the Anglo-Saxons themselves, and they actually write
Yeah,
that they're stealing the women. They're not physically stealing them. The women are willingly coming to them because they smell so good in York.
yeah,
So the Anglo-Saxons are saying the complete opposite. So as you said there, it depends on your interpretation and the way you're looking at it. To
yeah,
the Caliphate, which by the way, the Caliphate at the time, and it's in the middle of a golden age, it's
yeah,
very savage. But according
yeah,
to the rest of the Scandinavian and Anglo-Saxon world, that's very clean, you know?
yeah,
So yeah, 100% it does agree, depend on your interpretation and stuff. But like this view that you see in the Braveheart movie, where the theater staff in the back would, purposely put dirt on Mel Gibson's face per
yeah,
scene. And they did the same thing in the Viking TV show as well, because
yeah,
it was the same staff working in the back for that, wanted a we are the savage, backwards, barbarous people, and the English are the successors of Rome. That's the image they constantly wanted to give you. As Rachel had said there, it's the brainwashing imagery of, this group is the successors of Rome. They are the
yeah,
reason why we've won so many wars. We are greater than them. That's the image that even today they want to brainwash into us. As the Buddhists would say, our thoughts are not our own. And this is how they subconsciously do it, is by dirtying their faces and stuff, showing a barbarous Viking, showing a barbarous Celt, showing civilized, clean Englishmen who are the
right.
true successors of Rome. We, the English, are the successors of Rome, and they, the barbarous Celtic people, are the savages.
Yep. Yep, it's just not true. And there's some people who want to triple down on the idea of the filthy, stinky Middle Ages, and
Mm.
that's how ingrained this brainwashing is, which in part is due to these horrible depictions in Hollywood, right?
Mm.
It's the circular argument. Well, why do I think the Middle Ages were dirty? Well, because that's how they were. Well, why do you think that? Well, that's because how they're depicted in movies, but they're depicted in movies because you think that's how the Middle Ages were.
Mm.
Right, so it's the snake eating its tail on that
Oh,
score.
big time. Just moving on the questions there. Would the armor be from a Roman influence? When it comes
Mm,
down to
no.
originally, as you would say, Celtic culture were the first ones to put together riveted mail and stuff, and of course the Romans would have made adjustments to the riveted mail. Riveted mail wasn't the main armor for the Romans itself, but would the Romans had those influences into riveted mail? Yeah, they would have had those bits and bobs of influences and stuff. But by the time we get up to the Scottish War of Independence, a lot of these changes are being made by France in particular. France was one of the main people who were altering and changing riveted mail going into the high Middle Ages. So I would say by this point, it's definitely more of a French influence rather than a Roman influence when it comes
Yeah,
down to riveted mail. Remembering that riveted mail wasn't the main armor for the Romans back in the 30th AD and stuff.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the thing is that armor is always a response to advances in weapons technology.
Mm,
Right. So, so armor is definitely not going to stay the same over the centuries because you've got different technology, you've got different kinds of warfare, the way that battles are pitched or staged changes. So yeah, they're definitely not still wearing ancient Roman. It's ancient Rome no longer has an influence
mm.
in the armor world by
Oh,
the
for
13th
sure.
century. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I studied. I think the studied letter is a misinterpretation of the garments, and yeah, I definitely would agree that there is many situations. We were even looking at that with the live stream this week, where we saw this weird kind of leather armor, and I knew exactly what the source
Yeah.
was in living history, which was, and you're bang on right, a that somebody had looked at gambits in armor and thought to themselves, "Oh, that
Oh.
looks like it's leather." So in your case, when it came down to
Oh.
Bannerlord, yeah, I do believe that it was ending of what they were looking at. That they didn't quite, their brains didn't jive. They were looking at padded armor, not leather armor. That
Right.
did
I
happen.
had never, it never occurred to me to think that people were misinterpreting the gambesons in the original depictions as being made of
Yeah,
leather. But yeah,
not
that suddenly makes sense.
yeah, not even the original sources. It was actually living history. I know exactly where it was taken from. It was Bannerlord. We were looking at it, and we were looking at the armor, and I was like, "Wait, I've seen that." And I went back into the photos and stuff in living history reenactments, and it was a friend of mine. He has that armor. It's a Hiberno Scandinavian Gambinson suit, and I was looking at it, and it's slightly shiny, just by the way. It must be sweat or something in it, but it is slightly shiny-ish. But the way designers in the game put it into the video game, it comes out looking like leather armor. So I was looking at it and
Right.
looked back and went, that's why it makes no sense. And then on what makes it worse, Rachel, this gets even better, is I moved the armor to the side, and it was garments and armor on top of garments and armor. So what the game
What?
developers did, yes, I'm not messing around. So there's upgrades with the armor right in the game. And when you
Oh my
upgrade it from
God.
one set of armor to the next set of armor, what they did was they got what was it called, padded armor, which is the Gammonson, and then they put another picture of what was meant to be Gammonson on top of it, which is the leather armor. So I
Oh my
understand where
God.
they were coming from, but because they never even bothered going back to the original source and just asking my friend,
Oh
what
my
is
God.
that? They decided to go running off by themselves. So yeah, that's what happened there with that one. I definitely fully agree.
Wow. Okay. So, just so you know, the shine might be because the linen might be polished. So you can
Oh,
actually, if it's made of linen,
mm,
or it could be made of silk. I mean, they had silk gambesons. The upper class definitely could afford a nice silk gambeson, but linen can get polished
mm,
just from use. It can just get polished, or you can polish it. Actually, you can polish it with a polisher like this. Basically, it's a glass blob of hard glass, and you can just polish your linen with it until it shines. So
mm,
that could be two reasons that it's shiny that aren't disgusting reasons
mm.
that it's shiny.
Oh, I just to pop over as well at the time as well, it needs to be highlight the fact that because you're all going into the cloaks and stuff, and I can actually bring up the cloak into the conversation into the next part, which is the marriages on the Scottish side. But I just want to highlight that William Wallace at the time is located around here in Scotland, up around the
Mm,
southeastern part of Scotland. He's in that mixture area between the Gaelic world and the lowland Norman world. That I say quote unquote Norman, because at the time they were kind of mixing around the place, right? So we just kind of say
yeah,
Norman to
that's
simplify the conversation. But regardless, he's in that kind of mix between the Anglo-Norman world and the Gaelic world in that region. And so you would have seen a mixture of clothing. So a lot of people are asking about what does kilt, what does brat mean, what's the meaning for these words, which
right,
is interesting itself because the next group of scenes that we do see are Scottish weddings. That's what's depicted in this movie. Now,
right.
in this, there is so much. I think we could end up spending the next hour ranting. We hopefully I'll get to cover the Battle of Stirling Bridge. I don't know if we get to cover it because, gee, this wedding, there's just so much to
So
unpack.
much.
And
So
you know what?
much.
We'll take our time. If we don't get to finish our little rant, we'll just continue it next week.
Yeah.
If Rachel wants to, because God, there's so much in this
So
movie to
much.
depact.
So much.
Regardless, this movie opens up and they're once again wearing absolute wild rags.
Yeah.
I just don't understand the rags whatsoever. When I looked up the movie, now easily you can tear this, but what I found was a Scottish Norwegian wedding at the time, a depiction of this one. How inaccurate, or is that accurate?
That looks like a Victorian depiction.
It's not bad for Victorian depiction, though.
It's not contemporary. So again, everyone's the women's, their clothes are way too fitted. So this isn't, again, we're in an era when the women's garments are voluminous. They're full. They're very full. Even in the peasant. So even in the peasants, even if the skirts aren't full, they're not fitted, I guess is my point. So it's not fitted. So this is fitted, right? This is a 15th century kirtle. This is fitted. This is not how women in this era would have dressed. By what you're looking at there, that's much more 12th century-ish in terms of the silhouette that we're looking at there. So yeah, the women should be wearing garments that are not fitted. They just aren't. They would have a belt. They would be colors. There would be colors. There would be colors at the very least. Again, what Isabella is wearing in her breviary is very similar in silhouette to what the serfs would have been wearing, what peasant women would have been wearing. And I want to emphasize that peasants are not synonymous with serfs, right? All serfs were probably peasants, meaning they were farmers, but not all peasants were serfs. Peasant is just the old word for a farmer, for someone who works the fields, someone who works, a paysan from the French. So yeah, some peasants, even by the end of the 13th and early 14th century, were doing pretty well for themselves. So, again, this idea that everyone's in rags and gray and brown and God forbid black, it's not true. So someone said, this was interesting, Philip, someone commented that we have no idea how the commoners dress. Oh, but we do. Actually, in many cases, we know better how commoners dress. Do you know why we know better how commoners actually dressed than we do the nobility?
No, I don't. Go on.
Bog bodies.
Oh,
bog bodies. Bog buddies. The people who get murdered and thrown into bogs in the Middle Ages are not nobility. They tend to be middle or lower class, and the bodies are hidden in the bogs. And they're tossed into the bog with all of their clothes on. And the bogs preserve the garments so wonderfully well. So, for example, we have the body of the Boxton man from Denmark. In about, sort of like the Danish German in area of influence, sort of that part of Germany, Frisia. And this man, they think he died, they're not certain. They think he died sometime in the first half of the 14th century. And every single thing that was made of wool that he was wearing was perfectly preserved. So, and we know that he was not a nobleman. He was a commoner. But he still has a nice tunic. He's got a nice hood. He has nice hosen. He has nice shoes. He had a nice satchel. And it was dyed. It was dyed with madder. So it was red. It was not brown or tan. So in many cases, we actually know better about how the lower classes dressed because they're the ones who get murdered and tossed into bogs, not the nobility.
Another photo as well I had seen online is this one as well. When I typed in about the Scottish Norwegian marriages and the marriages at the time and stuff, I'm assuming this is much later on where we have Edward I in the middle. This perhaps is Robert I.
So that looks Tudor, and that's a Tudor depiction.
Okay.
So I think, that's like Henry VII era depiction of that. In fact, I think I know that manuscript. Yeah. So that is, I'm pretty certain. Now, granted, mind you, on my screen, it's super tiny, so I can't really see it very well. let me see if I can bring this stream up on my giant screen without creating havoc in my place. So then I have a better, because I think this is a Tudor depiction, but let me
think that
let
might
me.
help as well if I just zoom it.
Oh yeah, that helps a lot. Yeah, that's a Tudor depiction.
Hmm,
Yep, 100%.
solid.
Uh, yeah, so that is depicting how a Scottish king would have looked in the 15th century and
Hmm,
dressed in official, right? Those are ceremonial robes. That's
hmm,
not how the king would just walk around normally. That is specifically for ceremonial functions like parliament, like coronations, like investiture ceremonies, things of that nature. That is
hmm,
that
hmm,
is how a king would have dressed in state. He's dressed in state, basically.
hmm, hmm, hmm. For sure. And we'll jump over. One of the questions I just want to get back to as well. So, at the time when people are calling the kilt or the brat and all this kind of stuff, at the time they're mostly just talking about in the 13th going into the 14th century.
Yep.
They're mostly just looking at the cloak that you can
Yep.
see there on the shoulders. That's what people are talking about in the 13th, 14th, sorry, 13th, late 13th century, early 14th century. There is
Yep.
no big, massive cloak to tie around the pantsy edge from what I've seen. There's none of that kind of stuff happening quite yet from what I
Yeah.
can see. I don't see, except
And
for
and
depictions like this and stuff. Maybe,
right.
maybe, maybe.
So they're often, so the brat in this area, the few depictions I've seen. So there is a no. There's the King O'Connor, right?
Yeah,
That effigy that dates to like the late 13th, early 14th
yeah,
century, right? His
mm,
cloak is relatively long, but
yeah,
it's, not everyone is going to have a cloak that's relatively long. Long cloaks are annoying. Everyone,
mm,
please let me make this clear. They're beautiful to wear and you can feel all melodramatic, but the second you need to do anything
mm,
useful, cloaks are annoying for the most part if they're
mm,
long, right? So yeah, the brat in this area is, the word brat just means cloak. It means mantle. And
yeah,
so what the serf, or well, you don't really have serfs in Ireland, but the moral equivalent of a serf in Ireland in this era, the brat they're wearing is not going to be same as the brat that the king is wearing.
mm,
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that the terms for Irish clothing are just as general and non-specific as the terms for medieval English clothing or medieval French clothing. You can't say, well, this is the traditional Irish brat. There's no such thing.
mm, mm. But it's interesting because, as you said there, we do start to see the mini ice age. So we are probably
Yeah.
seeing bigger cloaks starting to appear during the Scottish War of Independence.
Yeah, so
And
we
as
have we it is things are there is actually there's a really cold snap that sort of presages the mini ice age. But yeah, I mean, sure, cloaks could be getting bigger,
mm,
but it's not, again, a lot of fabric costs money. Fabric is super expensive in the Middle Ages.
yeah,
So the average person is not going to be able to afford a giant rectangle of cloth to just wrap around themselves.
mm, 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 mm.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
not
it's
there yet.
interesting as well. But Caveman also brings out a very interesting point as well, because we have the Brehon Law in Ireland. What was it called? It may indicate that there might be multiple, colors of clothing inside of the cloak. What was it called? I just push on ahead to Caveman's thing. Different patterns and colors according to Brehon Law, a code around it. As in, free men would have had three noble, three colors of clothing in there. A noble poet would have had about five, and then a king would
Right.
have had about 10 and higher. So the Brehon Law does kind of indicate that there may have been multicolors inside of a cloak and stuff around the 13th, 15th century. Maybe that kind of, I'm just chucking it out there, and you can easily disagree with me, Rachel. Maybe that's where we kind of get this kind of tartan look in the, what was it called? 13th, 14th century.
Well, I mean, everyone tartan the plaid, the tartan pattern is there's just no. I haven't seen any actual evidence of it
Mm,
in Ireland at all.
yeah.
The none of the extant. textiles that we have from medieval Ireland have that pattern in them.
Mm,
So I think in the Brehon laws, that's first millennium stuff you're talking about.
yeah.
That wasn't really in application anymore by the 13th or 14th century,
It's
as far
kind
as
of
I
gone
understand.
into the struggle stages. I'm not sure. This is
Right.
interesting now. I'm not sure what laws they actually have in Scotland at the time, especially during the Scottish War of Independence, because I have to highlight here, like for myself and Rachel, this is not our field of expertise. We're just giving this a kind of light review.
Yeah.
However, I haven't gone into the details to know what kind of law is in place during the Scottish War of Independence, what laws Edward I trying to enforce, and what laws what was it called? The Bruces are trying to fight to preserve. I just don't know, to be honest with you. And on top of that as well, what we have, and I was saying this to Dr. Owen O'Neill at the time, is you do have Brehon law up to the coming of the Normans in 1169. And then it just goes into this weird bastard era when it comes down to laws and stuff, where you had the original kind of quote unquote Hiberno Normans, and that's me just simplifying the people that immigrated from Wales and England during
Right.
the Norman invasion of Ireland. These people then trying to enforce their common law in the designated areas where they've been placed, well, kind of forced their way into, where they try to force these foreign kind of Gaelic people, and also these foreign Normans are trying to enforce their ways onto the Gaelic people. Two foreign groups are confused what each other's trying to do. And
Right.
instead, what happens is you just have bastard laws of both the old Brehon laws and these common laws they're trying to enforce, plus the canon laws as well that are just coming in from Europe as well, trying to be enforced as well, which leads to a whole load of confusion, which is eventually kind of organized by the original judges that come back into the Gaelic lands to fix everything in the late medieval period. But in this period of going into the Scottish War of Independence, Ireland is just, when it comes down to laws, a complete and utter mess.
Yeah,
So
that's what I assumed, which is
yeah,
why I very much doubt that any of those were being enforced or reflected in any kind of way
yeah.
in daily life.
The
Um,
only
that,
laws I see being enforced is English common law, and you've seen what happened there with the statutes
right.
of Kilkenny. It turns into a complete revolt against the
Right.
people. I don't see any documentation from the O'Neills trying to, because at this point, as you pointed out a good few times, Rachel, when it comes down to clothing, the O'Neills are trying to survive. They're literally making their clothing around this little mini ice age that's come into force, and that's where we
Right.
start to see the image, the original imagery of the great kilts and the big massive brats. That starts to come in. So from the understanding of myself and Rachel, it's not so much the enforcing of Brehon law that brings about the kilts that we know today. It's actually the changes and them trying to adapt to the mini ice age that's come in
Yep.
that brings about the great kilt,
Yep.
not the Brehon law, from my understanding.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. The great kilt is literally, it's cold. Let me wrap this giant blanket around me.
mm,
Wow, it's easier to wrap it around me and move if I put a belt on.
yeah,
Right. So that is literally how the great kilt was invented. It was an act of desperation.
yeah,
um, and so I was thinking about where you're talking about the Brehon laws, talking about different amounts of colors that could be worn inside a cloak.
mm,
So the problem is that trying to interpret words
mm,
that describe a visual reality without having a picture is tricky. So for instance, you said that these cloaks can have so many colors in them. I didn't imagine a tartan. I imagined one that you could just have, like you were allowed to have a cloak that was blue, you were allowed to have a cloak that was purple, you were allowed to have a cloak that was yellow. I'm just tossing colors out there. So
mm,
three separate cloaks, like you're allowed to have cloaks in these colors,
mm,
right? Or with these colors in them.
mm,
Whereas lower classes were only allowed to have a brat that was either this or that color, right? So
mm,
not that all the colors were in one cloak necessarily, but those are the colors your cloak is allowed to be.
mm, mm,
The other possible interpretation, if you want to take it the idea that, well, all those colors have to be in the cloak, then I would say, well, that could just be strips of fabric in different colors put together to make a pretty multicolored thing. It doesn't have to be that the fabric is woven with those
mm,
colors. In fact, it's less likely that a law like that would be talking about fabrics that have to be woven with those colors, because that's going to be problematic in terms of sellability for your fabric,
mm.
right? if kings are the only ones who can wear fabric that is purple and yellow and blue, for instance, I'm not saying just because I don't know the Brehon laws, but if kings are the only ones who are allowed to wear colors that are plaid, tartan in those color combinations, then some poor weaver is going to have a very limited market for for their fabric, right? So
Yeah,
it makes more sense that they were talking about either you are allowed to have cloaks with these colors, or you're allowed to have these colors in your cloaks in strips or
yeah.
shapes of some kind, rather than that the fabric is woven that way.
I just want to continue attacking Caveman's argument here because it's a brilliant argument, Caveman. So you should definitely keep it up there. But I want to attack it at the same time. So no offense, Caveman. I just like attacking your argument because you bring up some amazing points. Because Caveman then does elaborate on this one, and I think Rachel would want to attack this one as well. So no, don't take this the hard way, Caveman. It's just you bring up really great points, but I also just want to attack it and move it and do all kinds of stuff with it because it's brilliant. Brehon law was a code of Gaelic Ireland up to the 17th century. And then he brings out the Maguire, the O'Donnell, the O'Neills, and many more weren't feudal lords. Gaelic Ireland was mostly Brehon law, which is something I kind of massively disagree with. There was definitely bastard feudalism that came in with the Anglo quote unquote the Anglo-Normans and stuff in there. And there was definitely adapting and changing with the O'Connors. You can see that with the way that the seals and stuff were going in there. So it's not like the moment the Anglo-Normans come into Ireland, there's definitely adapting and changing there. Plus, and I think Rachel will attack this part as well, even the colors, that they're not the same colors, it's not the same fashion. There's definitely changes going on there. And Rachel, even doing her study into the 15th century Ireland, will definitely point out that there's changes of color coming in. So even from both the sense that you have common law coming in here and Brehon law trying to adapt around that, and even with laws when it comes down to raising military forces with the coin and livery, that definitely changes as well.
Yeah.
So we're definitely seeing massive changes in there. And it's something I want Rachel to kind of expand on as well, is the different colors that are now coming into Ireland as well. So even we were saying this about blue and purple, like blue and purple are two of the top colors when it comes down to the early medieval period. But there's a good few times where me and Rachel have scratched our heads going, that color has to change. And it's the same thing with black as well. Black becomes, it changes so much, especially going into the 16th century. So even if you turn around and say, well, this guy is definitely enforcing Brehon law, it's not the same Brehon law in the early medieval period than it was in the late medieval period. On top of that, what we're talking about is the 13th century, not the 17th century. And I feel when it comes down to the 13th century and the early 14th century, Brehon law is trying to struggle to survive until we get into the Gaelic resurgence, and especially with Art MacMorrough Cavanagh. Now, granted, once Art MacMorrough Cavanagh is able to go into Dublin and take that tribute, then we can see Brehon law and the Gaelic resurgence fixed into place, and we can see that. But it's not, in my opinion, it's not the same Brehon law as it was afterwards. Now, granted, I haven't gone into the level of detail into the Brehon law going into the 15th century than I have originally in the early medieval period, especially in the 10th century. 10th century was kind of my field of expertise because I wanted to prove about, what was it, 10 years ago now, that Dublin was under Brehon law, and I managed to prove that in the 10th century. So 10th century will be more of my field of expertise. But I feel any reading I've ever done when it comes down to the 13th century or the 14th century, it's an era where there's a lot of struggling there, not just for the Gaelic people trying to hold on to Gaelic ways, while also struggling with the mini ice age that's come in here, that's definitely altering and changing the clothing, but also for the quote unquote the Hiberno or Normans, who are also struggling as well, trying to enforce English common law, or at least in some situations, depending on where they are within the Lordship of Ireland, even just trying to adapt to survive, do you know?
Yeah, so I guess I should have clarified. What I meant is that the Brehon laws that were in effect in the 9th and 10th century aren't the same as laws that come later, which is, you make that point, Philip. Yeah. But also that they definitely are not enforced everywhere in Ireland in the Middle Ages. Yeah, so the colors change, availability of colors changes, lots of things change over the centuries, and so I just what in my study of fashion, I just don't if that those laws don't really come across as being reflected in any kind of material way.
Mm,
Now, granted, we have to understand that in studying the historical fashion of Ireland, there are a lot of stumbling blocks. One of
mm.
them is Oliver Cromwell,
Oh, why?
uh, and his destruction of Catholic any art that was sort of Catholic adjacent, and of course the archival fires in Dublin in the early 20s. So there are definitely some stumbling blocks, but the my point was that the Brehon laws to which Philip is referring, which are from the first millennium, are not still in effect by the 15th century, by the 13th century, by the 14th century, by the 15th century. They're different. They change,
Mm,
right? These laws change with time. And for certain, we have wills from Dublin from the 15th century. I've studied dozens of wills from Dublin from the 15th century. And the colors that they talk about in these garments that are being bequeathed to other people run the gamut, right?
mm,
There's no association. Well, he's a knight or a man at arms, so he can only wear these colors. It's not there anymore.
mm.
So
Oh, for sure. And because what was it called? Twitchy Witch brings in some really good comments as well. That I just want to. What we might do for the next 20 minutes is kind of just expand on the few of the comments there on the clothing and stuff. And I'll just have a quick gawk at what I was planning on next. Oh, we might do a wee bit on the cause of the start of the war, or we might cover that next week. But anyway, regardless, I'll try to answer the questions there. Twitchy Witch, by having more wool on the market. Oh yeah, that's a very good point as well with the 100 Years' War. Because going into the
mm,
100 Years' War, wool starts to get more cheaper, doesn't it? I forgot about that. By having more wool on the market, that isn't by being used by the monks. Then why not make longer quantities for sale at cheaper prices?
right.
Um, yeah, that's a very good point as well, especially going into the 100 Years' War. And then you have the market, but that's also
Yeah.
true as well because sheep booms in Ireland as well just before the 100 Years' War. Because when the Hiberno-Normans come in, one of the biggest pluses they actually have, and it becomes a massive thorn in the side of the English, is the fact that Ireland has a successful, because of the Hiberno-Normans, Ireland ends up having a successful wool market, and starts to, as you pointed out as well, starts bringing their wool overseas stuff and starts to rival England,
Right.
which is a massive thorn in the side of the English. That definitely would have made wool cheaper, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
That's a
but
good
also
point.
so that the corollary to that is the Black Death kills 50% of the population in Europe, which means that now this is obviously post Braveheart, everyone. So just to be clear, we're now getting into the mid 14th century. But the point I want to make is that the second you kill 50% of your population by whatever means, there's a shortage of labor, and that
Mm.
means that
Oh
wages
yeah, that's
go
true.
up, and
Mm.
that means that the people who were, on the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder are still actually now earning pretty well, and they can start affording more garments with more fabric in them, longer cloaks, for instance. They can afford luxury goods. And that is in part why in the 1360s we see the statutes of Kilkenny, right?
Mm.
Because that's not, the statutes of Kilkenny they don't happen in a vacuum. They're part of
Mm.
a comprehensive packet of sumptuary legislation that Edward III passes.
Mm.
So people need to understand it wasn't just that the poor Irish were being picked on. No, 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 no. Everyone was being picked on. Who wasn't a high-ranking, a peer of the realm, basically
No,
by this. Yeah, everyone
no,
was getting picked on.
including me. Picking on me because of my accent, my sexy accent. You're jealous of my accent. That's it.
Totally. The way you say torn instead of thorn, absolutely. It does it for me every time.
What was it called? It's just Rachel punching me in your face. How dare you speak like this? Speak American. For my own limited research, the kilt was very much a late development, as we don't see any sign of it until the 17th century.
Yes, that is correct. That is 100%. Unfortunately, of course, as always, my comments are doing whatever the hell they want, so I don't know where my comments are relative to the conversation.
Mm,
But yeah, for 100%, the kilt, like people understand it, like this pleated skirt, like
mm,
garment, is that's a 17th century invention, and it arises out of the fact that at the end of the 16th century it's getting very cold all across Europe, especially northern Europe, and so these cloaks that people were wearing in Scandinavia, not Scandinavia, sorry, Scotland and Ireland, they're getting larger and larger to cover more of the body, and eventually the men say, I can't do anything if I'm just wrapped in a giant rectangle of fabric. And
mm,
someone at the end of the 16th century gets the brilliant idea to put their belt over top a
mm,
belt over top of it. So they're not wearing just that blanket though.
mm,
they're wearing they're wearing their normal clothing beneath it, which is going to be a doublet and hosen. And so they wear their doublet and hosen, they put on their giant rectangle, they belt it, and then they take the rest of the giant rectangle and drape it around themselves in a way that allows them to access their arms. And eventually, they get as the 17th century wears on, men being peacocks that they are, decide they want to have a little more style, a little more tailoring. Then eventually, someone gets the bright idea that they can put really nice, neat pleats
mm,
in under the belt. And then someone gets the bright idea in the 18th century that they could separate it out from, the rest of the blanket altogether and just have the kilt, which, is basically a skirt. But that's so post medieval. There are no kilts in the Middle Ages. Sorry, not in Europe anyway. Probably somewhere in the world, maybe in Africa, someone's wearing an actual kilt. The
mm,
Assyrians wore them, the Egyptians wore them in the second millennium, third millennium BC.
mm, mm, mm,
but but not in Scotland, not in Ireland. Sorry, everyone.
mm, mm, for
Uh,
sure. And then Kevin jumps on with that one. Did they use stag horns as weapons like they showed in the Braveheart movie?
wait, they did what? Staghorns? Wait,
Yeah,
oh wait,
stag horns.
isn't that the assassination scene where William
Was that?
Wallace like jumps in like a ninja and goes and kills some of the Scottish nobles who betrayed him,
Oh
right? Is that
yes,
where that happens? Is that what he's
yeah,
talking about?
yeah. Did they use stag horns? No, and you,
Wait,
Kevin, you
wait.
know they didn't.
I think it was a very valid question, Philip. Let's not criticize.
No, Kevin knows better.
Staghorns.
What was
Oh
it
my god.
called? There's an entire book on Scottish knives. What's horrible about that scene is there actually is an entire history around Scottish knives in that period. And the
Oh my
bloody, I
god.
should know the name of it because it pops up in Ireland as well. Where we've got these beautiful kind of evolution of the sacks in both Ireland and Scotland that you see the gallo glass have, and it's for literally when the formation is getting a bit too close, they take out their secondary weapon and they could just stab away. And I cannot bloody for the life of me remember the name of the knife, and I wouldn't mind. There's an entire book dedicated to that knife, and 1 second, I'll see if I can quickly bring it up there. While Rachel digs into any questions that she wants to cover
Oh
on
yeah.
Scottish clothing.
Yeah. Courtney just asked, did my comment show? Courtney King, I can see your comments.
Mm.
I can see yours. I don't know when you made that comment. For all I know, you made it an hour ago. But yeah. Um, God knows my chat is just, I don't know.
Mm.
I feel like the comments in my chat are
Skeen.
detached from the timeline.
The
So
Skeen. That's the name of it. Right. So they had the Skeen. So the Irish and the Scots, well, I can't remember what I think it's called the Skeen as well up in Scotland. But anyway, in Ireland, it's referred to as the Skeen. And it's the kind of short knife or short sword or whatever the hell you want to call it, big dagger of a thing they can use to get it. And it exists not just in this period, but all the way up to the late medieval period and Renaissance, because it's great to get in between the full plate armor. Amazing weapon. There's different techniques and stuff they start to develop to get in between full plate armor as that develops. But I think there was a question early on as well asking if they had full plate armor in this period. And no,
nope,
not yet.
nope.
It
Mm-mm.
does start to actually develop after this period going into the Black Death and stuff, you start to
Yep.
see those experiments and development going on. But it's not until around 1420 that there's a new technology starts to appear. Well, it's not the technology, it's more of a skill is developed within the blacksmiths and stuff where they're able to go completely wild. Plus, there's a new development in metalwork and stuff. What is it? The science of metalwork and stuff starts to really develop. Regardless, it's now at that point that full plate armor starts to really expand and blow up from that point onwards. But here now, they're not quite yet starting to get full plate in the Scottish War of
Yeah.
Independence. Going
Yeah,
into
this
the
is
100 Years' War, that's where you start to see the experimenting going on. And then eventually 1420, that's where you start to see the full-on full plate armor popping up.
well, I mean, basically by the Black Prince, you've got more or less full what most people would call full plate. So it depends on what you mean by full plate. But in this
Yeah.
era, no, it's just that's what we have. Yeah, exactly. What you see there, that gruesome scene of Roger Mortimer being dismembered,
Mm,
that is what we've got. Yeah.
mm.
And
Good.
but by the way, everyone, if you have not worn a full suit of mail, you
Mm,
know, hauberk, coif, everything, you don't understand just how heavy that stuff is. You know, everyone
mm,
thinks, oh, it's all light, and no, it is heavy.
mm, mm, mm. Um, Good morning to everybody who's just jumped in the last 10 minutes or so. Hope you're all doing well. If you have any questions whatsoever on Scottish clothing during the Scottish War of Independence, definitely jump on there. We're just finishing up our first review
Yep,
on the Scottish War of Independence. Next
yep,
week, we look like we're going to focus on the marriage between Willie Wallace and his wife and what caused the start of the Scottish War of Independence. So,
yep.
although they claim in the movie itself it started 100 years ago, next week we'll actually talk about what caused the Scottish War of Independence itself. So, if there's any other questions you guys want to ask on Scottish clothing, definitely ask now, or any questions on clothing whatsoever during the Scottish War of Independence. And also, on top of that, guys, if you're into Scottish and Irish clothing, definitely pop into us on the 18th, the 9th of the 18th, which is going to be
Hmm.
the 19th for myself and Rachel out of
Yep,
Asia, who are trying to escape the homeless crisis and all the other mad stuff happening in America and Europe right now. We're hiding in Asia
yep,
with
we
the other
are.
Americans and Irish and
we're,
Australia
we're
and all
we're
that kind of stuff.
refugees.
Yeah,
We're
yeah, yeah.
refugees.
Hiding. I hide under my wife's bed. I happily advise marry yourself a nice Asian girl and hide under a bed. That's what I would happily advise for all the mad stuff that's going on. But anyway, regardless, getting back on topic, if you're into clothing, on the 18th, myself and Rachel are going to be
Yep,
talking about 15th century clothing and trying to
yep.
raise some money because right now I'm just wearing whatever's around the house. But hopefully we can raise a bit of money and Rachel can get an old project going to put together some 15th century clothing for myself because I absolutely love reenactments. And hopefully, with some of the money that we can raise, Rachel can document the making of 15th century Anglo-Irish
Yep.
clothing from the Desmond Fitzgeralds, because I'm actually from Mallow, so I'm from the territory of the Desmond Fitzgeralds, which definitely see themselves going more Irish than the Irish themselves. So we'll see what we produce on 18th anyway. We'll see what Rachel puts in front of me, and we'll try to put together a project for Rachel to put together, and that will be on the 18th. On top of that as well, if you're still into clothing as well, I will have Melissa Shields back on again on the 20th of this month, and which is going to be about 9 o'clock Irish time, and we're going to talk about what was it called? Anglo-Irish clothing again with the Desmond Fitzgeralds, but this time on the 16th century. So the 16th century clothing. So if you're into Irish clothing, definitely pop into us on the 18th and on the 20th for that kind of stuff. I'll just pop
Yeah,
over
so
comments and stuff. What's that,
Yeah,
Rachel?
we definitely have some fun stuff planned for you all. So definitely join in. I've done so much research on Anglo-Irish clothing, and I've got primary sources to talk about. I've got inventories. I've got wills. We have some visuals. So I hope to help you shape your view about how the fashionable man about town would have dressed in places like Dublin and Waterford and Wexford and whatnot. So yeah.
For sure.
Let me see. We do have some interesting comments here. One of them was, "Are these nationalist wars before nationalism?" Yes,
Yeah, interesting.
100%,
Mm,
100%. The Scottish War for Independence is not how it was referred to in the 14th century. In case you all are wondering,
mm,
in fact, it was probably not referred to in any particular way with any particular label at the time.
yeah, yeah.
So
It is interesting, all right, because the war at the very end, it is used as a precursor to Scotland defining itself as Scotland. Because at the end of the war, the Scottish go off and write a whole load of literature justifying what is the Scottish crown. And the number one thing all the nobles agreed to is that it's not the English crown, that's for sure. You know, that's kind of the conclusion they come to, where they define it because they have to, at the end of the Scottish War of Independence, the Bruce and all of his nobles have to define themselves as different to the English crown, because the English crown now, and going into the Hundred Years' War, with the second part of the Scottish War of Independence, you have England who's trying to constantly justify invading and taking over Scotland, which is so funny because by the time we get up to the end of the Tudor period, the Scotch are now trying to flip it around so they can take over England, which is
yeah,
so funny with the
and they
Stuarts.
do, and they
Yeah,
do ultimately.
yeah, it's so strange. Like,
It's really funny. Most people don't realize that most so-called English kings since William of Normandy have not been English.
mm, very, very true.
Yeah,
I'm trying to find a more because we're finishing up now because there's only
yeah,
five
we're
minutes
wrapping
left.
up.
So
Yeah,
I
let's
can't see
see.
us doing. What I'll do actually is pump over to the child at the very start because I don't think we need to talk about poor young William Wallace
Oh,
anymore.
yeah. So there was a question, was Edward, and I'm assuming Courtney means the second, the one who was friends with Hugh Despenser? Yes.
Yeah.
Hugh Despenser was his second favorite. So
Mm,
the second famous favorite, shall we say. Yeah. He was friends with Hugh Despenser, and that is what definitely part of the thing that led to his downfall ultimately. Right.
mm.
Okay, just looking back through the comments.
Um, primary sources music to my ears. Yeah, that's always the main thing anyway. And Jim, well, campaigning maybe. Oh, I randomly clicked that one. We're mostly, if you're talking about dates when it comes down to the Scottish War of Independence, we're mostly talking about the late 13th century. So the movie claims that the Scottish War of Independence starts in 1280. However, in reality, the war doesn't start until around 1284, and they define it with the death of Alexander III. But as you know yourself, these would have been things in reality that would have kind of blurred into a war. At no point does Edward I declare war on Scotland. That's why it's even confusing later on with William Wallace when he is done for treason against the English crown, because William Wallace never kind of knelt before Edward I and gave his promise in the first
Right,
place. William Wallace was always a lord to his local noble. He was never loyal to any
right,
Scottish and English crown. And also, that's a very important thing to highlight as well, because this is where Scotland highlights its nationalism is from this war, because at the very end, they define what it is to be Scottish and what is the Scottish crown, which is very, very, this is why we keep going back to the Scottish War of Independence over and over and over again, because this is where Scotland defines what it is because of this war. It's the
right,
same thing with the Irish when it goes down to Art MacMore Cavanagh and his definition of his push against the Gaelic resurgence, and why we keep bringing up the statutes of Kenny, because whatever, it's so funny, whatever the English said is unacceptable in the statutes of Kenny is what Irish nationalists turn around and say, that's what it is to be Irish,
right.
unacceptable.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because later on, then during the Irish Civil War, going into the Irish Civil War and the Irish War of Independence, Churchill turns around and says, in a very annoyed way, because the Irish had just successfully rebelled and pulled themselves out of the United Kingdom, except for Northern Ireland, sadly. Churchill turns around and says, "Why couldn't the Irish be English?" And it's like that's literally how we define ourselves, as not being
It
English,
is
you
not
know?
English.
Mm,
Yeah, it is it's a way of defining yourself that's actually kind of negative, because
yeah.
it's like, well, what are we? Well, we're whatever, we're not English. Okay, but like literally there's 214 other countries in the world at the moment, for instance.
Mm,
So could you narrow it down a little bit?
yeah.
Not English is a pretty broad term.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Like obviously, as you know yourself, like there's way more to our culture, but it is funny
Oh
because I
yeah.
remember being in
Yeah.
school and being drilled in with the stat. I don't know if they still drill. I don't think they do still drill the statutes of Kilkenny into history books now. But I remember being a small child and us going through the statutes of Kilkenny, and it was so funny because it was everything that I did as a small. I played hurling, which was the native Irish sport as a kid, and there it is, no hurling and no Irish kind of. It was just when it was no hurling, no Irish clothing, no stirrups on a horse. It was kind of like that's everything I do. What the hell? So even when I was like, and it's so strange. Maybe it's just successful Irish nationalism or something, but it was just everything in that statute of Kilkenny. I, as a child, and don't get me wrong, I know they were nitpicking it out just to kind of highlight our modern nationalism, but it's just so funny. Caveman writes, the statutes of Kilkenny were opposing the Gaelic system of Brehon law dress, which the rest of the Gaelic lords were using.
Mm,
Definitely. Which goes back to
yeah.
your original argument, Caveman, that they were still using Brehon law at the time. But it's just our kind of argument to that is that the Brehon law was adjusting and changing over time. And I think Rachel kind of tripped over herself early on when she said, oh, well, there's no Brehon law. What she meant is that it's not the same Brehon law from the 10th century that I had been
Yeah.
studying and stuff, that it had altered and changed over time. But you probably would have had those alters and changing regardless going into the 12th century under what was it called? Murtagh Breen, when he needed to make those adjustments and changes with the reform of the church that was coming in and the coming in of canon law. So those changes and
Yeah.
adjustments would have had to be made anyway, especially with the church at the time. So those laws and stuff were changing. And I understand your argument, Caveman, especially when you're using the main sources to have a very much more black and white view. The only problem I have with that is that sometimes that's not really the reality, especially when you have those changes happening, do you know?
Yeah, and the thing about the statutes of Kilkenny is they're not as cut and dried as you might like to think either, because there's
Mm,
not, by the 14th century, there isn't this, well, we're Irish and they're English in Ireland. It's shades, right? Like you've got people who are dressing in continental, Irish people who are
mm,
dressing in continental fashions, for instance.
yeah.
They're not dressing according to Braveheart laws or according to Gaelic Irish fashions, but there's also no real evidence that the statutes of Kilkenny don't actually delve that deeply into the garments themselves. Like the implication, there's not discussions of shapes and seams and lengths, right? They focus the statutes of Kilkenny focus a lot on facial hair,
Mm,
actually. um, and the angst that is expressed in the statutes of Kilkenny is that there's a problem distinct. It's about the pale versus not the pale,
mm,
right? So people who are in the pale and the people who are not within the pale. The problem is that you have people who are not within the pale who are coming in and looking like people who are within the pale, and they're getting away with raiding and stealing
mm,
because they look the same.
Mm,
So the statutes of Kilkenny aren't actually necessarily about banning what's Irish. They're about making sure that the English people who are living in the Pale look English so they don't get mistaken for being the enemy. Like that's part of the language. It talks about so that the English aren't mistaken for being the enemy being raiders, right? We
for,
need to make sure that the English people or the good people within the law abiding citizens within the Pale are looking like they are not these Irish raiders. So it was less about controlling clothing necessarily and more about making sure that distinctions were maintained. But you have to remember the statutes of Kilkenny aren't enforced outside of the Pale.
mm,
So that wasn't something that was enforced over all of Ireland. By 14th and 15th century, England isn't that strong in Ireland.
for sure. What I'll do actually, because it actually came out, the same thing came up last week as well, and it's inside Dr. Owen O'Neill's field of expertise, which is the changes going from the early medieval period into the late medieval period, and that kind of shake up that happens in the High Middle Ages to Brehon law. And so what I'll do actually is next week I'll ask Dr. Owen O'Neill tomorrow, because of the fact tomorrow we will be covering the same time as tomorrow, what was it? Same time as today, we'll be covering the Tudor conquest of Ireland, which in Irish time will be at 9 o'clock. It will be 9 o'clock tomorrow. We'll cover the Tudor conquest of Ireland, which is when Gaelic resurgence happens. Arch MacMurrough, successfully takes the Black Rent from Dublin, putting Dublin into the Pale. So what we'll do tomorrow is we'll cover the Tudor conquest of Ireland, and then next week we'll cover what was it called? The changes of the Brehon law going into the late medieval period. So Caveman, definitely pop in for that one, and we'll go into further detail about that next week, especially with Dr. Owen O'Neill, who specializes more in that field of expertise, because what you're bringing up, really, really, really important points there. Especially with the changes that are happening during the Scottish War of Independence. So you're bringing up amazing points there, Caveman, for sure. Just before I finish up as well, I just want to answer Jim O'Neill's question, because I think it's brilliant, and especially hammering what Rachel's been saying for a good bit as well. So thank you, Jim O'Neill. Once again, Jim, you bring up, not only can you bring up some very, very funny but edgy jokes, but you also sometimes bring up some brilliant, brilliant questions as well. And here he asks, did the Irish and Scottish use their clothing during the Scottish War of Independence for shelter?
I have not seen any evidence of that amongst the Scots. The Irish brought, now whether the Irish were doing this while they were in Scotland as levies, that I don't know, but I do know that throughout Irish history, the brat does definitely, you see it being used in the epics. That's what I'm looking for. In the epics, it does get used as a shelter. Yeah, it's a giant rectangle of fabric, depending on who you are, and so it's useful for that. During the Scottish War for Independence, though, I haven't seen any chronicles mentioning that myself. So yeah.
Happy days. Right, I just want to pop up because Caveman has another brilliant one. I just want to, if you don't mind, you're going, Rachel.
Unfortunately, literally the comments are coming completely out of order in my comment feed. So I have no idea when this comment was made, but I saw that Caveman did correct me, and I'm glad he did. I wish I'd seen the correction at the time. Yeah, so I was thinking of Simon de Montfort for some reason. That picture of the man being dismembered, that's Roger Mortimer. He was Isabel's lover. So that's a little bit post Braveheart period, but still reflects more accurately how men-at-arms would have dressed in this era than King. So yeah, so that depiction of that poor knight being slaughtered, that is Roger Mortimer. And yeah, it was Edward III who had him killed. Although I'd like to correct, that is bullshit about Edward II being killed with a hot poker. There is zero actual contemporary evidence of that. Zero. Zilch. He was probably just left to starve to death. Which is not necessarily better, actually.
He probably did in reality, but I still like the story of him dying of a hot poker.
So here's the problem with that story is that was concocted specifically to try to make him seem even more illegitimate as a king, right? that was a concoction, and it was also pretty homophobic. But yeah, so there's zero evidence from the era, from the time that is what happened. That's a story that arose centuries later, I think, actually. So
Mm-hmm.
sorry, everyone. And it's a story that people like to pass around now because it's salacious, right? It's titillating to think about something so horrible being done to someone. I guess some people have really dark sides. So, that story, people like to be horrified. So that story gets passed around now like it's real history, but it's not.
But
Sorry,
it is.
everyone.
It is. My tour guides will be covering the horrifying stories from now on. Okay, they're better. They're better. Right. Is there any other questions you want to cover there, Rachel? What I'll do actually is I'll definitely cover, because Caveman's brought up some brilliant information there. So what I'll do is I'll actually save that to Dr. Owen O'Neill tomorrow, and we'll see about, look, because I want to cover that topic regardless. Is the changes in Breton law going from the, what was it called? I suppose around the 12th century to the 15th century, and what changes happened there. So we'll definitely do that next week with Dr. Owen O'Neill, and I'm asking him tomorrow about that, because of the fact that this is just a very, very interesting topic for sure. So we'll do that tomorrow. I'll ask him tomorrow. Tomorrow, I am with Dr. Owen O'Neill, and we will be covering the Tudor conquest of Ireland, but not going into the further details about that. We're just doing the skeleton of it, and it's going to be some bloody skeleton because it's a long enough conflict going from 1534 all the way to 1603. So definitely tune in tomorrow. That is Irish time, 9 o'clock. I'm not sure what time that is in New York. I know you keep correcting me, Rachel, but I completely
7
forgot again.
p.m.
7 p.m. Irish time. Other than that,
No, New
guys,
York time, 7
New
p.m. New
York
York
time.
time.
Happy days. Anyway, other than that, guys, thank you so much. Rachel, once again, thank you for all the information and just reading my mind in the middle of the night when I was a bit stuck for more information. Thank you so much for that. Rachel, what's your plans for the rest of the week?
What is today? It's Wednesday, right?
Yes. Well, it's Wednesday for us.
It's Wednesday for us. Yeah. I will be doing a medieval cooking party today, hopefully. What time is it now? Yeah. I'll be doing a medieval cooking party later on today, my time, which is going to be later on whatever day it is for the rest of you. I've got a medieval sewing party scheduled, and on Saturday we have something this Saturday, or do we have something this Sunday? This Sunday.
We
This Sunday our
do.
time. Right. This Sunday is
Yeah.
our, or
Melissa,
this
so
Friday?
it's
Wait, no,
yeah, we have, right. So for our Friday, which is the
we've got a
18th
couple
for
of
everyone
things.
else,
Yes.
we have
Yes.
the 15th. We have 15th century clothing, where we're going to
Yep.
raise money so we can do the project.
Right.
For me, you're going to be doing the project and making all those videos on how to make 15th century Anglo-Irish clothing.
Yep.
So you're going to be talking to me and explaining what is Anglo-Irish clothing in the 15th
Yep.
century, because I'm from Mallow, which is under the control of the Desmond Fitzgeralds, and I love the Desmond Fitzgeralds because they're the ones who are doing absolutely brilliant stuff during the Wars of the Roses and just beating up the butlers and taking over the Lord Deputy of Ireland and all that stuff, right? So we're going to be covering the clothing for that on the 18th for you guys, which is the 19th for us, right? So 18th, 18th, 18th for you guys, okay? And that's going to be at our normal regular time of 10 o'clock a.m. for us on the 19th. Then
Yep.
on the 20th for everyone else, but on the 21st, well, actually on the 20th, sorry, on the 19th, on the Friday, which is the 20th for us. This is all getting confusing, but bear with me. So on the 20th for Rachel, but for everyone else, it's the 19th. We're going to be covering, it's going to start off with Irish clans and families, and then it's going to turn into, once Rachel comes back from her workout and stuff and jumps on to the rest of us, it's going to turn on to a regular medieval conversation and stuff, right?
Yep.
So that's on
Yep.
the 19th, right? Then the next day, on the 20th for everyone else, and for Rachel on the 21st, is going to be a conversation with Melissa Shields covering was it 16th century Anglo-Irish clothing. Okay, so it's a continuation of the conversation that we're going to have on the 18th. Okay,
Yep. So
We're
we've got
clear.
a lot planned. In other words, stick around,
Yeah.
everyone. Everyone, I would like to remind you to check your notification bells for the Creative Contessa and for Irish Medieval History, because YouTube randomly will reset your notification settings. So if you're not getting the notifications when each of us goes live or launches something or whatever, it's because you have to go and double check your notification bell and make sure that all notifications are clicked. If you don't click all, the algorithm will decide for you what it is you want to see rather than what you actually want to see. So double check your notifications, everyone. And please like and subscribe to both
Mm.
channels. And if you'd like to support us, we each have patrons. And I think I've got channel membership. Do you have channel membership also, Philip?
Yes, I do actually have channel
Yep.
membership on right now.
Right.
Although I'd rather if everyone jumped over to Patreon because they do better deals over there. Plus, for about 20 quid a month, I also cover classes once a month. Sorry, not once a month. I do it every Sunday for you guys. This week, we're going to be covering William Marshall and Isabel de Clare in Ireland.
Yes.
So we will be covering William Marshall and Isabel de Clare this week. Huge, massive topic. So definitely pop into me on the Sunday. So once all that is done, everything we just said there, you can then pop over to my Patreon, 20 quid a month. Absolutely brilliant. So definitely pop on over there for that. Also, one more thing as well. On the old 24th, Christmas Eve for the rest of you guys. If you're over in Australia, going to be the 25th for Christmas Day itself. But on Christmas Eve, for everyone else, myself and Rachel will be doing a Christmas special. So definitely tune in for that one. So we have tons and tons of stuff going on. And then finally on the 27th, I can take my holiday for a wee bit and wave goodbye to the rest of you.
I won't. I'll still be streaming across the holidays, everyone, so stay tuned. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for your fantastic participation today. I wish I could have read the live chat in any kind of normal timeline, but there it is. Have a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, and stay creative, everyone.
Definitely. Caveman, that explains everything. Okay, I'll see you guys. Bye.